In case you missed it, here's a Sports Animal Rewind.
Let's talk college football. It's time for the Sports Page Summer of College Football, presented by Buddy Greg RVs and Motorhomes, our daily preview of teams and conferences around the country for the upcoming college football season. Find Buddy Greg RVs and Motorhomes on their Facebook page, their website at buddygreg.com, and follow them on Twitter at BuddyGregRVs. Now let's take a full conference look at the Pac-12.
To help us with that, we bring in ESPN.com Pac-12 blogger Kevin Gemmell. Kevin, good morning. Vincent Evan, how you doing?
Good. How are you guys?
We're good. We appreciate your time here this morning. I know in the West Coast it's a little early, so we appreciate you doing that with us. Does it, in your opinion, is it a multi-tiered conference this year with Oregon and Stanford at the top, then a group in the sort of a second tier on the edge of the top 25, and then everyone else? Is that the way you view the league this year?
Yeah, I think you would say that second group is in the top 25 because you've got teams like Oregon State, UCLA. I think Washington has a chance to be a preseason top 25. They probably won't be, but when I do my ballots, I'm going to put them in there. Same with Arizona State. So it's not necessarily their fringe top 25 teams. I think there are 3 or 4 legitimate top 25 teams behind Stanford and Oregon. But those are certainly Oregon and Stanford. That's certainly the top of the pecking order.
Kevin, it seems like the Oregon train is going to be tough to stop just because they have so much talent. But will there be any transition with a new coach, or does the fact that he has so much familiarity with what they do there, is it just going to keep on moving like they've been the last several years?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect any drastic changes. They're not going to become a West Coast offense all of a sudden because Mark Helfrich is running the show there. I mean, he was the offensive coordinator before. There was zero hesitation to promote him when Chip Kelly left, so he's the guy that they've wanted to fill that spot, and I think they're just going to continue to do things the way they have been doing it. He's going to want to probably put his stamp on it. There'll be a couple little tweaks here and there, but for the most part, it's still going to be Oregon football.
What about, that's the offensive part of it and being able to run that, but what about the full overall game decisions that a head coach has to make, and then also that CEO role that Chip Kelly seemed to embrace and excel in? How does Helfrich fill in those spots?
Well, that's the unknown. Chip Kelly was known for being very aggressive, especially on fourth down, 4th and 3 at his own, 38. He'd go for it, because it was Chip Kelly, and that's what Chip Kelly did. So we still need to see how Helfrich is going to approach that when he gets into some of those scenarios. Is he going to be a little more conservative, maybe especially early on in his head coaching tenure? Will he not take some of those chances? Or has he learned from Chip that if you've got the horses, go out and run them? And so that's really the big unknown, is what's going to happen when we get into some of those scenarios.
Kevin, Stanford draws a little bit of a tougher schedule than Oregon with some tougher teams out of the South this year. And that was, I saw in some of the preseason magazines, that was some of the reasons that people were picking Oregon ahead of Stanford. But in your mind, what does Stanford have to do to overtake Oregon and win that Pac-12 title this year?
More of the same. What they did last year was exactly what David Shaw wants his program to be. Very tough, very physical. They're going to run power right and power left 50 times in a row, and then they're going to pop a play action to the tight end. They're not going to be involved in a ton of blowout wins. I think last year they played in 10 games that were decided by a touchdown or less, and they went 8-2 in those games. I think since overtime started, Stanford had only had 2 overtime games, and since Shaw's been there, they've had 3. This is not a team that's going to have a lot of blowout victories. It's a lot of white knuckles, but that's the way they like it. They really want to, maybe grab an early 7-10 lead and then just really grind teams down, and that's what they're good at, and that's what they were able to do last year against Oregon when they went up to Austin and beat them 17-14 in overtime. They really changed the dynamic of that series with Oregon, because the previous 3 meetings, the winner had scored at least 50 points and the loser had scored at least 30 points. And now all of a sudden you've got this low-scoring game, and that's exactly what Stanford wants to do. So they're going to keep approaching with that mentality and that approach.
visiting with Kevin Gemmell, who covers the Pac-12 blogger for ESPN.com. And here on the new Sentinel Sports Page, Kevin, you mentioned that you would have Washington, Arizona State, and several others into that top 25. Talk about what you think about who the third best team is in the Pac-12.
That's a great question. I think there's a few teams that could fill that spot. A lot of hype right now around Arizona State when you look at what they have coming back. Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year last year, Will Sutton, consensus All-American. He's just a phenomenal defensive player. He's got another linebacker who plays behind him named Carl Bradford. Also, just a high motor guy, a lot of sacks, a lot of tackles for a loss. And then offensively, they have a very efficient quarterback in Taylor Kelly, 2 running backs in Marion Grice and DJ Foster. And the way that Arizona State uses its running backs, they're very proactive in the passing game. It's a really fun and innovative offense to watch under Todd Graham and Mike Norvell. They use the running backs a lot in the screen game. They split them out in the slot, and they do a really good job of getting those guys in space, and it's a very efficient offense. And then Oregon State, they need to figure out what's going to happen with their quarterbacks first, whether it's going to be Sean Mannion or Cody Vaz who's going to take over that team. But they do have a near 1,000-yard rusher coming back, a guy by the name of Storm Woods, who I think is going to eclipse 1,000 yards this year. Very solid secondary, very solid defense, just a good overall offensive line. They're going to be a tough team. Washington, I think, is right up there. They've got a lot of pieces coming back. Now, they've been stuck in this mold of 7 wins for 3 straight years, and the question is, can they get over that hump? And when you look at what they have coming back this year, this is a really good opportunity for them to do it. Keith Price returns. At quarterback, Bishop Sankey was a fantastic running back last year. He started the season in sort of a by-committee role, and then Jesse Collier went down in the first game of the season against San Diego State. They lost him for the year. All of a sudden, Bishop Sankey becomes the primary back, and he rushes for 1,400 yards. Good wide receivers, the best tight end in the country with Austin Seferian-Jenkins. So all the pieces are in place for a team like Washington to finally get over that mental hump. And then you also have to look at the LA schools, UCLA and USC. You can never rule out USC just because of all the talent they bring in. And what Jim Moore was able to do at UCLA in his first year was fantastic. He got them to the Pac-12 championship game, and they really pushed Stanford in that title game. So it's hard to say who the number 3 team is when there's about 5 or 6 that could really fill that spot.
Kevin, it's no secret that Kiffin at USC is on a bit of a hot seat, but do you have any sense of what is needed to save his job? I mean, would 7 or 8 wins cut it, or does he just have to avoid a disaster this season, or does he really have to take a much bigger step forward and win 9 or 10 games and go to a higher tier bowl?
I think there's a few things that play into it, and obviously wins are a significant part of it. I think beating Notre Dame and UCLA would certainly help to sort of revive the fan base. But also some of the off-field stuff just has to slow down. Kiffin found himself in a couple of spots last year where, there was an incident where he was asked about an injury and he stormed away from a press conference, and then there was the issue about, how did he vote in the coaches poll? He said he didn't put USC number 1 to start the season, and he did. There was the issue about changing jerseys against Colorado, and, were they deflating balls for Matt Barkley to throw? There's just all these little off-the-field things that are just tiny little embarrassments to a program, and it's not very becoming of a program like USC. So I think if they clear up some of that stuff, and then, yes, the wins do need to come, certainly. They need to, I would say, 8 wins minimum, combined with, just a quiet off-the-field season as well.
Kevin, let's hit on UCLA. There's some people that like UCLA and others that maybe still want to take a wait and see. Where do you stand on the Bruins?
I think UCLA is really interesting this year because their quarterback, Brett Hundley, who was a first-year starter last year, he is an extremely explosive player, and he is a lot of fun to watch. But they do lose their running back, Jonathan Franklin. He was a Doak Walker finalist last year. A really good defensive end, Dayton Jones. He was a first-round draft pick. He's gone. The thing about UCLA is I think they're going to be a better team this year were last year, but the record might not show it because they do travel to Oregon this year, a team they missed last year. They have to play at Nebraska, a team that they were able to beat at the Rose Bowl last year, but that's a tough road game. They're at USC this year. So the schedule's tougher for the Bruins. So while they might be a better team, they might not have as many wins, if that makes sense. But I think they're going to continue to grow and progress under Moore because when you look at that coaching staff in particular, there's a lot of NFL experience with Mora and Lou Spanos. And Noel Mazzoni has been around a long time in the college game, and he's put together some of the best offenses, some of the best quarterbacks in college football. So I think the pieces are all in place for them to really get a good, sustained push. If Moore stays there for the next 5, 6, 7 years, we're going to see UCLA consistently in the top 20, top 15, maybe even top 10.
Kevin, I don't know if you heard the trivia question we had before you came in, but it was about what team in the conference in the last 11 years, I believe it was, had not won 8 games. And, you know, I might have gone down the entire list before I got this one right, but it was Washington. And it's a beautiful city. It's they got, I think, a nice new stadium they're building. I mean, it just seems like there's a lot of things that if I was a high school kid, I would want to go there. And you know, it seems like they have the resources. What has been stopping them from making that next step? And do you see that on the horizon for them?
Well, that's another good question because not a lot of people know. You know, they changed coaches. Obviously, they've got Steve Sarkisian in there now. They feel like he's the guy to get it done for them. They changed defensive coordinators last year. They brought in Justin Wilcox, and they made huge strides defensively in 2012 compared to what they were in 2011. So, again, I think the pieces are in place for Washington this year when you have all the talent that they have coming back. As you said, they do have the remodeled Husky Stadium's going to open. They played in Seahawks CenturyLink last year. The way the schedule shapes up for Washington this year, they open the year against Boise State at home. That is going to be a really critical game for them because you might recall that they lost to Boise State last year in the Las Vegas Bowl in the fourth quarter. I think if they win that game, the trajectory of their season changes dramatically because then they travel to Chicago to play Illinois, then they've got an FCS team at home before they start league play against Arizona. So if they beat Boise State, they're 4-0, possibly, heading into a really tough stretch against Stanford, Oregon, ASU. If they can pick up one win out of that, you know, they could be an 8-9 win team this year. The question is, can they get over that mental hump of still being, just being a 7-win team? And I think they're better than that, and I think Sarkisian's better than that. They just need to go out and prove it.
Another 7-8 win team somewhere in that range might be Arizona with Rich Rod. They've got a lot of excitement in terms of recruiting right now as well. But what do you think of this year's Arizona team?
You know, they've had some injuries at wide receiver, primarily losing Austin Hill. That's a huge blow. Hill was a Blitnikoff semifinalist last year. Really fantastic player, and he went down with a knee injury, so he's probably going to miss the year. And then they lose another wide receiver, Tyler Slavin, who left campus. So wide receiver is obviously a huge part of what he wants to do offensively. And then they lost Matt Scott, their quarterback, to graduation. So they've got a quarterback competition. They've got questionable depth at wide receiver. The bright spot is running back Kadeem Carey, who led the nation last year in rushing. Obviously, they're going to need huge production out of him if they want to get back to where they were last year. Defensively, they returned their entire starting defense. The problem was it was a defense that wasn't very good last year. So if they can make those improvements, they're running a 3-3-5 scheme under Jeff Castile. If they can get better in the scheme in year 2, then that will take some of the pressure off the offense, and it won't be a situation where they have to be in a track meet every single week in order to win football games, because they might not be able to have that same offensive production with a new quarterback and some of the injuries that they've sustained at wide receiver. So I think anywhere between 4, 7, 8 wins, I mean, they could really fall anywhere in that gap. It's just a question of how some of these new players step up.
Kevin Gemmell is the ESPN Pac-12 blogger joining us here on the new Sentinel Sports Page. Kevin, quick hit, if you could, on the 4 teams we haven't talked about that are probably the bottom 4 teams in the league: Cal, Washington State, Utah, and Colorado. Just a quick word on all those teams.
Yeah, all are very intriguing in their own ways. Cal's got Sonny Dice coming in as their new head coach. He's bringing the air raid. They're calling it the bear raid at Cal. They're a very intriguing team because they've got a good wide receiver core. They could really blow up offensively, or it could take some time for them to figure out who's going to be their quarterback and how that's all going to play out. Utah, also exciting because they brought in Dennis Erickson to be co-offensive coordinator. We all know about his reputation and what he does for offenses. The Utes are officially transitioning to a spread. So I think as they begin their third year in the Pac-12, it's a matter of them continuing to build on some depth. You know, everyone can put 22 good players out there. The question is, what's your next 22 look like? So that's been an issue for Utah, is just kind of building up that depth. Washington State, Mike Leach. Obviously, when you've got a Mike Leach offense, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. They, too, have a quarterback competition. They need to figure out who's going to be throwing the ball for them. Defensively, some big gains for them last year. A lot of people don't realize the improvements they made in terms of sacks and tackles for a loss. They jumped into the top 15, so they were really good at getting pressure. They just have a tough schedule, and it's tough to recruit to Pullman, and they have to play in the Pac-12 North that has Stanford, Oregon, Washington, Oregon State. And then who am I missing there? Colorado. That's right. Bucks. New head coach Mike McIntyre did really good things at San Jose State. In 3 years, he has them ranked at 11 wins. But again, it's a rebuilding process for them. They need to figure out who their quarterback's going to be. One bright spot for them, they do have wide receiver Paul Richardson coming back, who I think quietly can be one of the best wide receivers in the Pac-12. He missed all of last year with an ACL injury, so getting him back is going to at least give them one solid, down the field threat, which they were lacking last season.
Might want to give up less than 46 points per game. Just saying.
That would be helpful as well.
Kevin Gemmell covers the Pac-12, ESPN Pac-12 blogger. You can find him on Twitter, his work at ESPN_Pac-12 blog.